A while ago I made a video talking about Fire Force's power system, which is my favorite in anime, and while I don't like that video much anymore, I can't deny that it's what helped jumpstart my YouTube due to it being the most viewed video on my channel. And while recently rereading Fire Force's sequel and predecessor, I found that there is a lot more lore and in-universe history to its power system than I originally thought, so I decided to do a deep dive into everything about Soul Eater's power system. Before we start though, it would be great if you could leave a like for the algorithm and subscribe for future content. As the name of the series suggests, Soul Eater is all about the soul, and thus its power system is made up of concepts and abilities that are powered by one's soul in one way or another. For right now, I'm going to introduce the two most important aspects of Soul Eater's power system, Weapon Meisters and Demon Weapons. Meisters are characters who wield demon weapons and have their own individual set of abilities that go along with whatever weapon their partner is. For example, Maka specializes in using a scythe and her combat style is built around that. The only real exceptions to this are Blackstar, Stein, and presumably Lord Death, who can use a plethora of weapons. There are a set of abilities that only Meisters themselves have, but only one of them can be used by every single Meister, which is Wavelength Control. In Soul Eater, every soul of every person and even animal gives off what's called a soul wavelength. In order to use a compatible demon weapon, a Meister must adjust soul wavelengths to match with their partner. In some cases, when a Meister and weapon are not compatible, the weapon becomes extremely difficult or even impossible to use. Sometimes the weapon will be too heavy to wield, or in Soul and Maka's case, Soul's handle will burn Maka's hands when she tries to hold him. Some Meisters have the ability of soul perception, which allows them to sense and see the souls of other people, all the way down to the characteristics of a person. In his introduction, Stein was able to deduce the personality and fighting capabilities of every character simply by looking at their souls. The most notable basic ability of a Meister is the skill of Soul Resonance, which can be used by skilled Meisters and weapons who have a strong connection. Soul Resonance serves as a way to increase your power by sending a soul wavelength to your weapon partner, having them amplify it and then send it back, repeating this process over and over and ultimately culminating in an extremely powerful wavelength. In addition to being an overall power up, sometimes a Soul Resonance will also transform the weapon, and that transformation depends on the Meister and the weapon pair. When it comes to Scythe Meisters, for example, specifically Maka and Stein, they gain access to an ability called Witch Hunter, which is coined as the super skill of the Scythe Meister. Stein, who is named as the strongest Meister, is able to use the other advanced Meister techniques other than Witch Hunter, so I'll talk about those. As I mentioned earlier, weapons are used to amplify a Meister's soul wavelength, akin to a guitar in its amp, but Stein and a few others can do this on his own, and gains the ability of the Soul Menace technique. This technique allows him to expel his own soul wavelength in a way that is similar to electricity and can cause internal damage. It is possible for an extremely skilled Meister like Stein to adjust his soul wavelength to match just about anyone else's, including both Meisters and weapons. This also makes him immune to the Soul Menace technique himself due to the fact that two souls of the same wavelength will cancel each other out. All young Meisters and weapons attend a school called the Death Weapon Meister Academy, or the DWMA, to learn how to control their powers. Within the DWMA, Meisters are arranged by a certain number of stars ranging from 1 to 3 according to their strength and ability, with 1 being the lowest and 3 being the highest rank. To wrap back around to Soul Resonance, because I definitely forgot to put this in the script before, there is a technique called Team-wise Soul Resonance, which is exactly what it sounds like. 2 or more people perform soul resonance between them and their weapons, which results in a massive power boost for the ones using it. As with any regular soul abilities, this will not work if there is a lack of cooperation and understanding within the team. Demon weapons are characters who can transform into a weapon. These characters have certain abilities such as being able to absorb souls, which I will get to later, and whatever abilities their individual weapon forms give them. While in their weapon forms, the characters can still talk directly from their bodies and will appear as an astral form within their weapon. In Soul and Maka's case, Soul is even able to sense things through Maka's soul perception, presumably due to the nature of his abilities. There are a ton of different types of weapons. For example, there are gun types such as Liz and Patty, who are pistols, or Azusa, who is a cross between a crossbow and a rifle, as well as scythe types like Spear and Soul, and many more. For example, there's a character who wields two pots. One has the power of fire, one has the power of thunder. There's a character that wields a fire-breathing lantern. There's no end to the creativity when it comes to how many weapons there are in Soul Eater. Some weapons have the ability to partially transform their bodies into a part of their weapon forms, like how Soul can just turn his arm into a scythe blade. However, not all weapons are able to do this partial shapeshifting and need to be wielded by a Meister. At the very top of the weapon classifications are the Death Size. After successfully absorbing 99 evil human souls and 1 witch soul, I'll get into that later, don't worry. Weapons then evolve into Death Size and are called such no matter what weapon they actually are. These weapons are used as Lord Death's personal weapon and are given a sector of the world to watch over once they become a Death Scythe. All Death Scythes gain total control over their shapeshifting abilities. For example, Soul can choose whether he wants his scythe blade to be long or short at will, while before it was always a set length. On top of that, every Death Scythe gains a special ability after becoming a Death Scythe due to the Witch Soul that they absorbed. So I'll give a brief explanation of all 9 here. First up, we have Spirit Albarn, Maka's dad. Spirit is a scythe and was turned into a Death Scythe by Maka's mother, and was also Lord Death's assigned weapon for pretty much the entirety of the series. Spirit's special ability is ultra precise wavelength control, which lets him bring out the best qualities of whoever is wielding him. This makes him compatible with just about anybody and is extremely powerful in the hands of a skilled Meister like Stein or Maka. After Soul is made into a Death Scythe by Maka, he becomes able to use the piano in his soul, yes there is a piano in his soul, to do a plethora of things with his Meister's wavelength, including turning it into a sound wave that does damage, amplify soul perception to an extreme degree, and even turn his own blade into a piano as well. The next Death Scythe is Justin Law, who is in charge of protecting Western Europe. He is one of the stronger Death Scythes for a few reasons. For one, he is the only weapon to become a Death Scythe without a Meister, meaning that he can fight completely on his own. His weapon form is a guillotine and he fights using partial shapeshifting since he would be immobile if he just became a guillotine. Justin is also a clergyman and his abilities get stronger whenever he prays. Next up is Marie Mjolnir. I wonder if you can guess what weapon she is. Marie is in charge of protecting Oceania and is a lightning hammer who has the ability to shapeshift into a Tonfa as well. Marie's most notable ability is her technique called Izuna, in which she sends electricity through her Meister's motor system, greatly increasing their physical abilities. Marie is also capable of fighting on her own to an extent, but is much more effective when being used by a Meister. After Marie, we have Azusa Yumi, the overseer of East Asia, and as I mentioned earlier, her weapon form is a cross between a crossbow and a rifle. Her ability is that she's able to have ultra precise control of soul wavelengths over long distances, being able to communicate with whoever she's partners with from great distances, and even being able to see through their eyes, all while still being in her human form. And she can also just see great distances in general. She's often called the 1,000-mile eyes for a reason. Tezca Tlopolka, who is in charge of South America, is a mirror, yes, a mirror, and has the ability to reflect people's guilty hearts and even souls. Once your soul is reflected in the mirror, he can track you no matter where you are. Also, his Meister is a monkey. Dengu Dinga, in charge of Africa, is a rainbow axe. His powers are completely unknown. Jin Gallon, in charge of West Asia, is a genie lamp that can produce smoke that can solidify and allow him to become a flaming Jin, spelled with a D this time, an extremely powerful tower man or something similar to a robot that can shoot powerful lasers. And last but not least, Tsar Pushkar, in charge of Eastern Europe, is a cannon. And that's it. His head is the cannonball, and the rest of his body is the cannon, and that's literally it. Earlier when I said there were 2 important aspects to go over, I actually lied because there are 3. On the opposite side of Meisters and weapons, there are the witches, who have a completely different yet oddly similar set of abilities through the use of magic, which can only be utilized by witches or sorcerers. The witch race is entirely female and largely specializes in using transformation magic. Every witch, or at least every important witch, seems to be tied to an animal. Medusa is obviously the snake witch, Arachne is the spider witch, Erica Frog is the frog witch, you get the gist. For a large majority of the series, the witches are considered to be the biggest threat in one way or another, since they are the mortal enemies of humans, weapons, and the Grim Reaper, and have been so for over 800 years. This is mostly due to how magic works and what effect it has on witches. In Soul Eater, every witch is naturally drawn to destruction due to the pull of magic caused by magic's influence. There are a few exceptions, 3 to be exact, but besides them, every witch is instinctively destructive. Technically, there is another race I could talk about, that being the Grim Reapers, but there's really only 2 in the entire series, and their powers are completely exclusive and don't necessarily affect the rest of the power system itself, is what I would say if this video wasn't titled A Deep Dive into Soul Eater's power system. For Grim Reapers, however, I will be focusing exclusively on Death the Kid, since Lord Death doesn't fight and thus doesn't contribute much to the power system by himself. Even though he was made with the appearance of a human, Death the Kid is actually a Grim Reaper, or a Shinigami, born from a fragment of Lord Death. I'll be switching between Grim Reaper and Shinigami, just gotta bear with me. This means that his body is naturally physically stronger than a human's, and can also reject all types of disease, poisons, or even alterations such as hair dye. Shinigami have, again, Kid specifically, has limiters on his powers called the Lines of Sanzu, which are the white lines in his hair. The Lines of Sanzu could seriously be an entire video on its own, so I'm only doing a brief rundown. Kid was born as an immature Grim Reaper, and the Lines of Sanzu on his hair represent that. As Kid eventually grows older, stronger, and more mature, the Lines of Sanzu will connect one by one, and when the third one connects, he becomes a complete Grim Reaper. Shinigami are also just immortal, and the only way they can die is in the case of another complete Grim Reaper being born. And to top off their immortality, they can also regenerate. As a side branch from the Grim Reapers, we have the Kishin Ashura, who is another fragment of Lord Death. Asha was originally born as a mature Grim Reaper, not to be confused with a complete Grim Reaper. However, he became a Kishin after he ate his own weapon partner. A Kishin is created when a demon weapon, or somebody who has the ability to absorb a demon weapon, like Ashura, eats a large amount of human souls. Guess what? We're taking another side branch because Ashura has an ability called the Madness Wavelength. It's basically his soul wavelength, but it's able to affect people on a massive scale. Madness is something that everyone has at least a little bit of inside of them, and the Madness Wavelength amplifies the amount of madness in people who have a large amount of it, ultimately making them stronger and more wicked. The Madness Wavelength, which was originally the Madness of Fear, is so strong that it birthed new types of madness within people, such as the Madness of Power and the Madness of Boobs. Yes, that last one is real. The cool thing about Madness is that it can be harnessed and used as a power-up. Kid and Lord Death possess the Madness of Order, and Maka and Soul possess the Madness of Black Blood. And now I have to explain Black Blood. Black Blood, created by the witch Medusa, is pretty much a demon weapon melted down into a liquid that is inside of Soul and Chrono. During the process of soul resonance with Soul, Maka also gains access to the Black Blood and the power of Madness. The Black Blood increases her physical strength and durability, as well as giving her regeneration, and in the later stages of Soul Eater she gains Black Blood armor, which increases all of her abilities multiple times over. Now that we're done with that rabbit hole, I get to talk about the types of souls that exist within the series. First up, we have normal human souls. Every human and weapon possesses one of these, and their soul will visually reflect the character's appearance. When someone with soul perception looks at a soul, they will see one of two things. They will either see a small soul that shows up near the core of the body, or they will see a bigger soul that forms around the body and shows characteristics of a person's personality rather than their appearance. This isn't specific to human souls, but it's good to mention now. Next is a Grigori soul. This is a special type of soul that manifests in every 1 out of 50 million people. This soul is said to be the soul of an angel and will show wings when seen by someone with soul perception. After that, we have an evil human soul, which is a soul type of people or weapons who have consumed regular human souls. This soul usually appears red. And lastly, we have the witch's soul, which appears purple. The special thing about eating a witch soul is that it will grant a demon weapon who has collected 99 evil human souls the title of a death scythe. A witch's magic is contained in her soul, so eating one is what grants a death scythe their special ability, which are said to be abilities similar to magic. Now that the explanations are over, I can go into the history behind Soul Eater's power system. To get to the very beginning, we need to travel far back in time, so far in fact that we leave the series of Soul Eater and end up in Fire Force, where we meet the first Meister, the first weapon, the first witch, and the first user of soul resonance. During the last arc of Fire Force, some extremely important things happen that would go on to build the world of Soul Eater. The first one of those things is Shinra becoming God through the use of soul resonance, making him the first user of the technique. However, the version of soul resonance is slightly different from the version that exists in Soul Eater. Shinra doesn't use soul resonance with a weapon, he instead uses it to fuse with his brother and mom to become God. After this, Shinra creates the first Lord Death and rebuilds the world to function in a way where death is more intimate. While not confirmed, I'm assuming this change is why things like souls became tangible and why you can literally go and talk to the Grim Reaper. Due to the reality warping abilities of Adola and how strong Arthur's connection is with his sword, the empty hilt gains a soul and becomes the Excalibur we see all throughout Soul Eater, making Arthur the first Meister and Excalibur the first weapon. Arthur doesn't exhibit any of the soul abilities present in Soul Eater, but is still technically a Meister since he wields a weapon. Also in the final chapters of Fire Force, we see a hint of who could have possibly been the first witch, that being Inka Kasukatani. Again, she doesn't exhibit any witch powers, but her outfit and her striking resemblance to Kim Deal, a witch in Soul Eater, gives me all the reason I need to call her the first witch. There's also the fact that the biggest part of Inka's character is that she is attracted and thrilled by danger, which goes along with the pull of magic that affects all witches. Now we can travel forward in time to about 800 years before the events of Soul Eater started. While Lord Death and Albarn, a sorcerer, were discussing the way to combat the terror of the witches, they got inspired by Excalibur and came up with the idea of the demon weapons. But the thing about demon weapons is that in order to make the first one, they'd need to kill a witch and combine her soul with a weapon in order to give it the power of shapeshifting. The two ultimately decided against this method and didn't create the demon weapons. However, a certain spider witch named Arachne was spying on Lord Death and Albarn and decided to make a demon weapon herself. So she killed a fellow witch and merged her soul with an inanimate object and a regular human soul. This action gave her the two titles of the Heretic Witch and the Mother of all Demon Weapons. Over time, humans with the demon weapon gene started to be born, causing Lord Death to start the DWMA in order to teach the weapons how to use their powers and to train Meisters to wield weapons so that they can eventually eliminate all witches. Earlier, as you'll remember, I said that in order to become a Death Scythe, a demon weapon needs to absorb 99 evil human souls and 1 witch soul. This is because without those, a demon weapon is actually an incomplete being. However, being incomplete doesn't negatively affect a demon weapon in any way. Being born with a demon weapon gene is almost completely random as it can skip generations since Maka's dad's spirit is a weapon, but Maka has no weapon powers of her own. Unless we're talking about the anime.
So